Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. You know, the Beach Boys have put out a lot of albums over the years, and the quality of their album covers has ranged wildly from excellent, almost iconic, down to just laughably awful, with all points in between. Today I'd like to talk specifically about the early Beach Boy album covers, because the aesthetic in the early mid-60s was very different. Album covers were not so much a sort of object that you would want to have because it was visually pleasing, as they were just a big sign to let you know what was on the record. A lot of writing, a lot of graphics, often listing all the songs on the front cover. You can see the contrast between American albums and their English counterparts in things like the British release of With the Beatles, compared to Meet the Beatles in the U.S. and the Beatles' second album. Obviously, much heavier emphasis on what the album contains, graphics that scream at you like a roadside produce stand. Another example is Beatles for Sale versus Beatles 65 or Beatles 6. Americans loved a lot of graphics. And it makes sense because it was hard to get the word out that an album had been released in those days. There was no Rolling Stone magazine doing a big review. Maybe the DJ would mention it on the radio, but usually they were talking more about singles. So album covers had to scream. You can compare Help, the British release, to Help, the US release. Likewise, the Rolling Stones' first album. The English cover, no writing at all. The American cover, England's newest hitmakers, the Rolling Stones. Later on, even into 1966, the Aftermath cover. English version did have the title on it. The American version had not only the title, but the name Rolling Stones, just so you weren't going to miss out on who this band was, particularly as they had blurred the image on the American cover, which also drew some unfavorable comparisons to Rubber Soul, which had come out a few months earlier and also used a sort of a distorted image on the front cover. The first Who album, My Generation in England, compared to The Who Sings My Generation, with a listing of all the various tracks on the album. Another important purpose that record covers served at the time was they gave you information about the band that you couldn't readily get otherwise. Obviously, there was no Google search, there were no TV shows, Entertainment Tonight, or any place to find out much about the bands. There was no Rolling Stone magazine, no music magazines of any serious caliber for this type of music. So pretty much all you knew about the band was what you saw and read on their album cover. The first Beach Boy album, released October 1962, of course, Surfin' Safari. The album cover's not bad. It's kind of cool. You've got, the Beach Boys in a color photograph. I think that's a perfectly adequate cover. Lots of graphics, of course, all the song titles listed. There are a lot of outtakes for all these album covers. The Beach Boys really didn't do a lot of photo sessions. They seemed to do their photos the same way my family did, which was you don't take any photos for a year or so, and then when you get the camera out, you take 80 photos of the same thing. Throughout their career, the Beach Boys seemed to operate under that same general principle. Now, the back cover is very interesting. First of all, the band looks so young. When I bought this album in the early 80s, I couldn't believe that Brian Wilson had ever looked like that, so lean and lanky and young. We also get a paragraph introducing the group, which gives you an idea how Capitol Records wanted you to perceive them at the time. Let me read you a couple of paragraphs from that. The group is mainly comprised of people from Hawthorne, California named Wilson. There's Brian, Dennis, Carl, and their dad, Murray Wilson, a longtime songwriter who acts as manager for the outfit. Then there's the boys' talented cousin, Mike Love, composer of Surfin', who sings both lead tenor and deep bass parts for their unusual vocal arrangements. The remaining member of the Beach Boys is young David Marks, a neighbor of the Wilsons who plays driving rhythm guitar. Brian, the oldest of the Wilson boys, is the group's leader and vocal arranger. Carl is a very accomplished lead guitarist, while brother Dennis sings and plays the drums. Very interesting that they're introducing Mike Love as the composer at this point. Now we know that Surfin is a co-write with Brian Wilson, but that Brian basically wrote the tune Surfin. But that's not the way it's presented here. There's also a little footnote on the back cover explaining what surfing is for landlocked people or even those on the coasts who might not be familiar with this subculture yet. Production credit goes to Nick Vanette, which is the only time that particular credit will appear on the cover of a Beach Boys album. Their next album, Surfin' U.S.A., has no production credit on the cover, although again it was Nick Vanette. It also has one of the absolute worst Beach Boy covers. This generic photo from The Surfer magazine is the cover of the second Beach Boy album. The back cover, again, has a few paragraphs describing the band. Brian, in this case, is described as the leader and the one who writes most of the songs. Interestingly, there are no names associated with the pictures, so you don't really know who's who. You do get another outtake from the Surfin' Safari photo session. And as was customary at the time, you also get a little ad for their prior album down in the corner. This also includes some definitions of surfing terms from the time. A good set of heavies, gremlin, and toes on the nose are defined in italics at the bottom left of the notes. In September 1963, the third Beach Boys album was released, Surfer Girl. It's a great cover, almost iconic, love the graphics. My one complaint about a lot of Beach Boy covers is they have so much space just masked with blank area, all the way up through Sunflower in 1970. It would be a lot nicer had they used more space for art and less of this just negative white space. But still, a great cover. The back cover ties in with it using another shot from the sessions. And the back cover is also interesting in that the only song that it mentions besides the title track, Surfer Girl, which it says is fast becoming the romantic ballad of the day, the only thing that they mention is the song Your Summer Dream, which they say is a wonderful tribute to the Four Freshmen, sung in their style. They don't mention Catch a Wave, they don't mention Little Deuce Coupe, they don't mention In My Room, they don't mention Hawaii, they don't mention what were really the bigger tracks on the album. They also talk about the Four Freshmen like they were somebody that every teenager would know about. Now maybe this is because the Four Freshmen had been on Capitol Records for many years and they thought, well, maybe we mention the Four Freshmen, we'll get some interest in the Four Freshmen from the younger set. I don't know. No producer is listed on the back of Surfer Girl, although this time it would have correctly been Brian Wilson. It's also interesting to note that this is the last album on which the Beach Boys really sing about surfing. Comes less than a year after Surfin' Safari, about 22 months after their first single, Surfin'. Apart from the track Don't Back Down a few albums later on All Summer Long, this is the last album where the Beach Boys sing about surfing. 3 albums, less than a year, they're done singing about surfing. The car songs persist and sort of become the focal point for a while, but that's it for surfing. Only 1 month later, in October of 1963, the 4th Beach Boy album is released, Little Deuce Coupe. Now, this is a lousy Beach Boy cover. I mean, it's kind of become iconic for being so terrible in a way. The photo is of a Little Deuce Coupe, and I was interested to find out that the deuce in Little Deuce Coupe stands for the 2 in 32, which is the year 1932, the year these coupes were made. So it's really Little 1932 Coupe. I always thought it was something much more technical than that. The photo on the cover is a shot from Hot Rod magazine, and the guy you can see in the red shirt cut off in the photo is Clarence Chill Castello, the owner of the famous Little Deuce Coupe pictured on the front cover. The back cover, if anybody knows why they thought it was important to put this little shot of the car that says 169A/G. I couldn't figure out what that means and why that was significant to go on the back cover. If anybody knows, I'd love to find out about it. A little paragraph describing the band. Once again, nothing particularly interesting in it. The only Beach Boy mentioned by name on the back cover is Brian Wilson, where it says arranged and produced by Brian Wilson for the first time. And we'll see that credit from here all the way through Pet Sounds. On 1967's Smiley Smile, it changes to produced by the Beach Boys. But we'll see some combination of arranged and produced by Brian Wilson or produced by Brian Wilson from here on. It's actually not quite correct, because this album is a collection of some older car songs along with some new car songs. And then there's a few that are not car songs, like Be True to Your School. A version of that is thrown in here. Young Man's Gone, which is about James Dean. It's also about a car crash, so maybe you count that as a car song. Anyway, some of the songs on here had previously been released. 409, Shut Down, which were produced by Nick Vennett and or Murray Wilson. So it's not entirely a Brian Wilson production because it's got some older songs on it, but Brian was definitely stepping to the fore at this point. The Beach Boys' next album was Shut Down Volume 2, released in March of 1964. Now, when I first started getting interested in the Beach Boy back catalog, the title of this album really perplexed me. It was Shut Down Volume 2, and I could see there didn't seem to be any Shut Down or Shut Down Volume 1. Well, there was actually a Capitol album called Shut Down that was released in the summer of 1963. It contained the previously released tracks Shut Down and 409 from the Beach Boys, which each kicked off one side of the album. Also contained tracks from the Superstocks, Gary Usher's band, a track from Robert Mitchum, and a collection of other car songs. I can't imagine that the Beach Boys were particularly thrilled to have their new album named after a collection of car songs that they had nothing to do with, apart from having their tracks reused there, that had come out the prior summer. The album cover's not bad. At least you get to see the band among the cars this time. The beige background is not all that inspiring. Of course, I'm sure the art department thought that that made the graphics pop, and once again they've listed the titles of all the songs on the front cover. The other thing you see on the front cover for the first time is Al Jardine, who has returned to the lineup after being there very early prior to their first album. He's replaced David Marks, who at this point has left the Beach Boys. Of course, Al will be there for many, many years. The back cover has paragraphs talking about the band, basically hyping them, not really giving a lot of information. It's interesting, the tracks that they choose to talk about in the notes are Shut Down Part 2, This Car of Mine, In the Parking Lot, which are all kind of forgettable. Warmth of the Sun they mention. There's no mention of Don't Worry Baby, no mention of Keep an Eye on Summer, some of the really beautiful work that goes on here. It's like they just grabbed song titles out of a hat and named them in the notes. So this pretty much brings us to the end of the Beach Boys' surfing and car era. The next albums were transitional, leading up to Pet Sounds. We'll have to talk about those later. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you found this interesting. Let me know if there's anything on those album covers that I missed. We'll see what we can glean from the next batch of album covers in a future episode. Thanks very much. Bye.